I know some people have always hated what I do, so perhaps it will come as a pleasant surprise to them to find out that I've stopped. To be honest, it's quite simple. After what I saw up there, I can never go back. I can't tell you the number of times that people who would have been much better off minding their own beeswax and keeping their noses out of my business have informed me as if they are some kind of authority on the subject that you can't shoot deer in Britain or it's illegal to kill animals here. I've even had a few tell me that the only people allowed to kill deer in the UK are the royal family. Seriously, the same people who spend time telling me that I am somehow backward and old-fashioned because I want to hunt deer are the same ones willing to accept the idea that only the nobility should be granted certain rights. Honestly, it's laughable. In actual fact, rather than the facts that have been made up on the spot by some animal welfare do-gooders, it is legal to shoot deer under certain circumstances in the UK. Yes, it requires a license, usually a firearms one, and it isn't legal to shoot them at night or in their closed season. But other than that, if you have the right permits, the right licenses, and the correct type of firearm and ammunition, it is perfectly legitimate to kill red, fallow, sika, roe, and Chinese water deer on British soil. I should know, I've been doing it for years. Most of my hunting took place in Scotland, in the Highlands on the wider moors, or in some of the woodland areas of the lower glens. The weather and terrain are totally different from any American forest, and since I'm more used to hunting in the States, it presented a unique challenge for me. Thinking back on it now, I should have stayed in Scotland. The moor and woodland above this town was recommended to me by a friend on account of how he had seen at least 2 enormous stags roaming in the area in the past few months. Now, technically, I suppose I should not have been hunting there. The rules around whether the deer that live around Moreton are wild or could be considered fair game are sketchy. But since I didn't end up actually killing anything, I assume I can admit that I was planning to hunt up there. Specifically, I wanted to hunt those stag. Technically, it's illegal to hunt deer at night in England, and night is defined as an hour after sunset, so again, technically, I was probably breaking the law by doing what I was doing. My get out, if I happened to be caught, was going to be that I began my stalk in the early afternoon, so when I started hunting, it was technically daytime. It would be up to the authorities to prove that the kill came after the appointed time. Now, I know that some hunters will tell you that hunting at night is more difficult, and I can see why. The visibility is far lower, especially if you don't have night vision goggles, and even if you do, navigating the terrain is harder, because whilst you're focusing on the game, the ground under food is in pitch darkness. One misstep, one snapped twig, or stumble through the brush, and the animal gets spooked and bolts. Hunting in the dark is a game of stealth. I've always known that, and so have other predators. What I didn't expect in the northern hills and soggy moorland of merry old England was to encounter just such a predator. At the point it emerged, I was almost ready to strike. Slowly, and using telescopic distance lenses to put plenty of terrain between me and the target, I'd spent most of the afternoon stalking an enormous stag. My friend who lived in Moreton was sometimes prone to exaggeration and told all kinds of tales of fish he had caught and deer he'd shot that, if they were even a fraction of the size he said they were, would be in museums as exceptional specimens. In this case, however, he was 100% accurate. This thing was huge. Now, most civilians, by which I mean people who don't hunt and who have only ever seen deer on TV, tend to imagine them far smaller than they actually are. They think of Bambi or some delicate spindle-limbed thing that can hardly stand and would be knocked over by a stiff breeze. What they forget is that the road signs that dot the UK warning of deer crossing are not there for the benefit of the deer. They're there because if you hit a stag at full speed, the car is going to come off just as badly. These are massive, powerful, and if they get the wrong sniff of you, dangerous animals. A fully grown stag is a magnificent thing to behold. They can weigh up to 500 lbs, which is a size I can't convert into stupid British measurements of stones or kilos, but trust me, it's a hell of a big animal. When you consider that most heavyweight boxers weigh around 220 lbs, you get a pretty good idea. Their antlers can be huge and so wide across that it's difficult to get the thing into your truck in one piece if you want to get it back. My plan that night was to make the shot and come back to retrieve the carcass with my buddy and a few of his friends the next day. I never made it that far. I'd set myself up in the perfect spot, kneeling behind a fallen log just on the edge of the woods. Through the bracken, I had a clear line of sight onto a high knoll that fell down into one of those recesses the locals call a goyle. From there, I could see the stag feeding. I began to regulate my breathing, long, low, deep breaths, and kept myself as silent and still as possible. Sunset was 2 hours behind us, and through the night vision glasses, the stag's eyes shone white like luminescent pearls. Every now and again, the stag would raise its head. Its nose would twitch as it checked the air for changes in the wind and the slightest hints of a scent. Each time the thing looked up, I froze. Still as a statue and holding my breath, allowing not even the slightest tremor of movement that might lead to me being detected. By that point, it was pitch black. Far above the town and far from the nearest street light, the dark had crept in silently around us, colouring in with thick black paint every space that wasn't him or me. Now we were alone, he and me in a battle of wills. Or so I thought. But as it turned out, we were not alone at all. When I say that a stag is a large and powerful animal, I mean it. Were they more aggressive toward humans or more comfortable straying in inhabited areas, they would pose a danger to the public. They are heavy, thick-set, well-armed and strong. I knew this well. So when I saw that big stag's neck snap with a single twisting wrench, when I watched that enormous antlered head fall limp and slack as the neck was torn and twisted, at first I couldn't believe it. My mind, unable to process what it was seeing, simply repeated the line that what I saw was impossible. What thing in these isles had the power, the speed, and the raw, terrible strength to do that to a stag? I had heard of bears hunting deer, clamping their claws on the hind parts and crushing vertebrae with a single bite, but never had I seen a creature. Standing up on 2 hind legs, gripping a deer around the neck, and dragging it, thrashing, to the floor like it was a rag doll. Suddenly, staying quiet was less of a priority. I reeled and fell backward, knocking over the stand for my rifle, my drink and other equipment. I fell back on my haunches and tried desperately to adjust the goggles, to keep an eye on the thing that had rushed in a blur of teeth and claws out from the inky blackness and clamped its talons around the big stag's throat. After a few seconds, the vision jumped back into focus. I saw what had the deer, and I saw that it saw me. Lowered close to the ground, hunched on all fours as if ready to pounce, the thing's eyes were fixed directly on my own as its jaws remained clamped around the entire snout of the stag. Its head looked like a dog or a wolf, but with a skull that was many times larger than any dog had ever been, and a domed cranium that, rather than sloping downward as canines usually do, instead ascended and curved not only into a neck, but to shoulders and to arms. It was as if someone had taken the nightmarish head of some enormous hyena, dog or wolf, and placed it atop the body of an impossibly gigantic man. With a single upward tug of its jaws, the thing snapped the upper portion of the deer's head off from the jaw at the hinge, and raising its own head, allowed the meat, bone and sinew to glide into its gullet. I thought about trying to shoot, about to lift my gun and fire as many times as I could into that domed skull, right between those burning, knowing eyes, but I didn't. Partly out of fear that I might miss, and partly out of fear that I might not. That I might hit and injure the thing, but not kill it. I thought of those old tales, of how only silver bullets would kill a werewolf. Perhaps that wasn't what this thing was. Perhaps it was the kind of dogman I'd heard other more superstitious hunters talk about and even claim to have seen. I know now that the latter group were liars. If they had seen it, glimpsed the thing the way I did before I ran as fast as I could back to town, if they had panicked and fallen, spilled and clawed back across the moors, convinced that a thing that should not exist was pursuing them with every step, not stopping once in the mad dash back toward town and safety, if they had done that, then they wouldn't be hunters anymore. I left my gun at the scene that night and I haven't hunted since. Somehow hunting is a lot less fun once you know how it feels to be looked at as prey,